then was really to try to find a career, to try to find a way of making my way in the world. I'm coming up to 60 this year. It seemed a good time to be able to look back at my work from the age of 12 right up until the present time and to see if it made any sense, to see if it would stand up on its own against other paintings, and to see if I'd actually been true to my own personality. I'm a painter, and I could end up doing anything, but the truth and the reality is, looking at the landscape, looking at the sea, looking at nature is what turns me on. I think landscape is important because in Wales, our kind of history is about the landscape, and most of our industry has been to do with the land and the soil. If people think landscape painting is unnecessary or has no part to play, then they're actually kind of closing their eyes to what actually is happening in society. People visit the national park, for example, in North Wales. They don't get out of the cars. They travel through the landscape. They don't even open the window. So they don't smell the plants. They don't feel the wind in their faces or anything else. So there'll come a time when they're going to begin to realise what they've actually missed. And maybe painting could actually simply give people in the city an opportunity to understand what landscape is about, what nature is about. Four years ago, Oriel and the Small asked me, would I like to have another exhibition? And I replied and said, yes, I'd love to have another exhibition. But I suppose I was well aware that when it actually came to fruition, I'd be coming up to 60. And that seemed to be a really good time to take stock, to find out whether, in fact, what I'd done over the last 40 years held together as one kind of unit. Did it look as if I had my own sort of voice? Did I have a vision of my own? Well, I'm extremely nervous about it, to the extent that I've even had nightmares thinking about it. So the nervousness comes out of the fact that I've no way of knowing whether the paintings are any good. I haven't seen them for a long time, so it's really a kind of a matter of faith.
What Peter is giving us this evening is a clear, concise and obvious explanation of what it means to be Welsh, and it doesn't require any further definition. It is to enjoy and celebrate a making and a remaking of our landscape, our heritage, our culture, and our class background, whatever that may be. It gives me great pleasure to declare this exhibition open, because it is the book of a life, the like of which we have not seen in art in Wales.
I decided deliberately that I would go to North Wales and I would try to become a painter, because I just wanted to paint pictures of a kind of landscape which I found stimulating. But the influence in my painting actually started in the valleys of South Wales. The landscape, the kind of people that I grew up with, the kind of place that I played in. Growing up in Abertruda in the 1950s was a wonderful experience. We were poor, like all people in the valleys were, but it was about sort of community. You know, the street was full of aunties. They weren't my aunties, really, but we know the cliche, you could go to other people's houses. You know, the things that we as kids did. We lived on the coal tip, or down by the stream, or we lived on the mountainside. We camped out, we played football, we played rugby. So my memory of South Wales growing up there. Just a wonderful experience. Because I've got, in the particular exhibition I have at the moment, 2 works from the school that I first went to and first painted. I've had this kind of idea of what would it be like to go back to Abertydru and paint the same things again. How would I respond? What kind of paintings would I make? Would I be able to make paintings? So I instinctively find that interesting, and it might fail, but it just seems just an interesting thing to try and do.
As far as growing up in the valley, I mean, I know he used to spend lots of times by himself. He'd get up in the morning and he'd take his boarding easel with him and be off up into the mountains. And I mean, most of his paintings were either self-portraits or, and the majority of them, landscapes.
My twin and I did the 11 plus, and my twin passed the 11 plus. So I went to the secondary modern school. But the worst thing about it was that there was no way that you could do GCSEs, there's no way you could do O-levels. So at the time, it really was a kind of a dead end.
He was fortunate enough there to meet an art master by the name of Gomer Lewis. Now, Gomer obviously seen the potential that Peter had and encouraged him tremendously to work towards that end. This was a fairy tale start for Peter, going to secondary modern school, failing 11 plus, and then having the opportunity to go into the career of painting.
Here was the art room, the old tin shanty, which this man Gomer Lewis used to teach in, so it's changed because it's gone. This here was the canteen. Clearly it is still the canteen, all the children are going to dinner. And this was a painting that I made here about 40 years ago, 1960. The building has hardly changed, except the colour has changed and a few odd differences to the roof. And then, over here, was those houses across there was where I lived. And some of my first paintings was done in the art room here, looking over there. I suspect when I painted here 40-odd years ago, the way that one would have started the painting would have been by making a drawing on the paper with charcoal and then proceeding to paint with powder paint on sugar paper. I don't paint like that any longer, so I'm not going to try to go back to that. I now paint directly. I'm going to look at something which is different to what it was 40 years ago, so I'm totally open-minded to what might or what might not happen. I don't have a preconception of how I want to paint it. Painting might take 20 minutes or 5 minutes. It might take 3 months. You don't know. Let's have a crack and let's see what'll happen. So I know for a fact that tree over there, from where I painted before, is in the painting that I did 40 years ago, but I can't see it very clearly now, so I'll just sort of skirt around it and just paint what I can actually see now. So no way am I thinking of art or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand what the place looks like now and how I feel about it. But Gomer Lewis would have canvases and hardboard on the floor, dripping paint on top of it to show us how Jackson Pollock painted pictures. So it wasn't about doing O-level or A-level. He was a serious man trying to be a painter himself, and he persuaded us children, from the moment we were in the art room, we were artists. When he said I could go to art school, I thought the man was mad. I thought, you must be crazy. But then I began to like the idea. So I bought a nice pair of chef's trousers with black spots, because I thought that's what artists should wear. Oddly enough, the Slade was the only place, part of University College London, where you could go without academic qualifications if you had what was considered exceptional talent. I had no idea about that exceptional talent, but I painted like mad for a year, put all my paintings in a big wooden box. When it got to London, it was left in the corridor by the bursar's office because nobody could move it. Now, there's no guarantee at the Slade that you'll get an interview, but I think they must have thought that if we don't get him here, he'll never get the box away again. And luckily, I was offered a place, and that was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me up until that time.
It's very, very competitive, very. And a lot of people crumbled under the pressure. A lot of students gave up or had nervous breakdowns sometimes. I think it must have been quite intimidating for people like Peter, you know, coming from working class backgrounds in the valleys, suddenly finding themselves in Bloomsbury.
What I arrived at the Slade with was a very kind of raw, kind of intuitive way of painting directly from things in front of me, very energetic, but not necessarily particularly intelligent. So what happened at the Slade was I met many teachers from Bill Coldstream to Ewan Hugelot to Frank Arbach and others who offered their advice on how you might make better paintings.
Frank Arbach was probably one of the most intelligent, sensitive, rigorous, demanding teachers I've ever had. But he always had the knack of hitting the nail on the head. If he criticised your paintings, he could go through the structure of it and he could tell you precisely why it didn't work. So you felt often you couldn't argue with him because you felt he was telling you what you knew yourself, but you didn't have the courage to admit.
He was a taskmaster. I mean, you certainly couldn't shirk any issues in Frank Arbach's room.
Cartwright Gardens was a view from a window looking at a tree and a square, which I drew over and over again. And there was a road that I needed to paint, and as much as I tried to paint the road, it never worked. And what happened one Friday evening, I actually painted it in, went out with my girlfriend at the time, went to the pub, came back, and the paint had all fallen on the floor, and the painting looked absolutely wonderful. And I never touched the painting after that.
And this is one of the things that I think tended to not necessarily impress everybody, but people noticed about Peter's work at that time, that the paintings were very thick and encrusted. But over the years, I think that also has changed, and the paint has become much more luminous, much richer, much thinner, and much more economically and sparingly used.
When it came to the final degree exhibition, I had to take these paintings in, and I had a grocer's trolley, so I wheeled it across London. And when I got into the Slade, Frank Arbach, who happened to be my tutor, was on the steps, and when he saw me wheeling it in, the Cartwright Gardens painting was staring him in the face. And he started smiling and said, "Well, at last it looks as if you might have done something." And that was smashing from my point of view, that he hadn't seen the painting. I was bringing it in for the final assessment, and he responded to it. So that's what it was all about.
So what happened at the Slade was I realised that you couldn't make a painting just based upon energy, that there had to be some kind of intellect and some kind of intelligence. What I learnt most of all was to begin to slow down and to begin to think things out. What this is about at the moment is trying to work out how can I make a kind of organised structure, which is not different to making a film or writing a story. It's not about just putting down feelings. It's about trying to make some kind of order of what's there. What other people see in your paintings, you don't know about. You can't sort of pretend to understand what 20 other people how they might react to your painting. So therefore, to start suggesting that your painting is about this or is about that, to me, just doesn't hang true. All the painting is about is what's on the canvas, what's on the paper, and a human being's response to looking at something and putting it on that canvas. How other people see it, you haven't got a clue. In 1970, I decided deliberately that I would go back to live in Wales and I would try to become a painter. First of all, I'd go to North Wales because that was slightly different to South Wales, so it'd be new ground. And secondly, because I just wanted to paint pictures of a kind of landscape which I found stimulating. And the ruggedness and the weather and all those kind of things which sound romantic were things which I felt would help me to paint pictures. And most of all, to paint pictures about things which I felt I could fall in love with and be stimulated by.
That stage in Bethesda, I think I moved about 5 times. And I moved 5 times, 2 reasons. One was to get out of debt, because we were always in debt, because I was teaching 2 days a week. And when we got into debt, we would sell the house, buy a cheaper house, and get rid of some of the debts we had. And then we'd build up another set of debts, and then we'd move again. It didn't seem much of a sacrifice at the time, I must say, and we wouldn't have changed it, but I do realise now that I was funding painting on the basis of increasing our mortgage.
Now that we've all grown up, I think sometimes he feels, well, I'm sure he feels guilty. He feels that we missed out on things, but I wouldn't have swapped my childhood for anything, really. You know, it was really rich and varied and just a good childhood. It was my childhood. In particular, I have very clear memories of him making the Prendergast Quarry painting. I think that's probably when I first became aware of that what he did was, you know, was a very real thing.
The painting of Bethesda Quarry is of great significance to me because it was a painting which was purchased by the Tate, and that began to change my whole career.
Well, I came to paint the quarry properly in 1980, but I'd actually come to make drawings there in 1970 when I first moved to Bethesda. And the reason for wanting to draw it and paint it was because it was an incredible man-made hole. And it was a fact that it was an incredible visual thing. It was that attracted me initially. I did try to draw it in the 1970s, but found it too difficult that I couldn't draw it. So I used to come up here in the early 1980s. I lived just by the bridge at the bottom. I had a wheelbarrow, and I used to come up and draw from the other end. For 2 years, I kept drawing the same thing, which was the centre of the quarry. And I realised after about 2 years that you'd never get an understanding of the space of the quarry unless you drew everything from the centre right back to one. Some people, when they compose a drawing, can compose on a postage stamp. I don't have that ability. When I start a drawing, I can never work out where the edge of the drawing should be or where the end of it should be. So the drawings, the way I make drawings, they tend to grow outwards. So that's the reason why I stick pieces of paper. It's not a gimmick, it's just an inability to be able to compose properly. All I know about sort of black lines within the way that I make paintings, they were there from the very word go, from the age of 12 or 13. Why they were black lines? Things probably. One, because I felt instinctively that's how the landscape was constructed as far as I was concerned. Others might argue that the black lines were being used because I didn't know how to put one colour against another colour, so there was encapsulating everything with this black line just to hold it together pictorially. I haven't got an argument one way or the other. Both might be right.
The quarry painting was a turning point because what actually happened, the painting wasn't in the Tate. I went up to London to the private view with Leslie. I had a wonderful time, you know, lots of champagne and so forth. I came back, and on the Sunday, I bought the newspapers, bought the Observer. There it was, the hard-won image. Columns of it. I went down the column, I could see it. Prendergast. Good Lord, I'm in the paper. So I read it, and it said the central room looked absolutely wonderful. The Francis Bacon and the Lucian Freud looked absolutely magnificent. What a pity the splendour of the central room was somewhat ruined by Peter Prendergast's Manic Bethesda painting. So So what do? Somebody phoned me up and said, "Oh, you must feel terribly hurt today." I said, "Well, no, not really. Somebody noticed the painting." So my job is to go on and continue trying to paint better pictures. And that is the story for any young artist, is that you'll keep getting knocked down. People will keep trying to put you in your place. You've got to have the ability to keep coming back. For the next 5 years, I began to work in the Frankham Valley, which is the other side of the quarry. So I set off to try to make something which would have the feeling of the space, the wonderful grandeur of what was there, but what wasn't a copy of the landscape. There'd be something you could take away from the landscape, put it somewhere else, and people could look at the painting and not necessarily know where the place was, but think this must have been some wonderful place. I think the fluency in the paintings, as I've got older, have become more instinctive, less contrived, partly because of confidence and a greater understanding of what painting is about. There's a greater sense of fluency there because I've begun to believe more in the way that I make images without relying upon the obvious influences I had when I was younger. I realise now when I look around here, all the things that I want to be in paintings are actually in the landscape around here. Landscape and things in the landscape are symbols of something else. You know, things like hawthorn trees, things of trees in wintertime, the sea in the distance, the tops of houses with smoke coming out of them. So in a way, I've come back to something which is very similar to what I began with when I was a young child. Do you want me to have one more go now then? Well, let's put a time factor on it, because otherwise we've gone until 10 o'clock.
Okay.
It's always better when it's dark. 5 minutes more, yeah, because there are other things to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All I'm trying to do is, in a very primitive kind of way, just try to make some sense of what I'm looking at. So when I'm using bits of cloth to get rid of bits of colour, I'm simply trying to create more space in the painting, because the painting has become cluttered. People talk of painting as a craft. There's a certain element of that, but that's not what it's about. It's about a philosophy. It's about exchanging philosophy, as is drawing. Drawing isn't just about technique. It's about looking and seeing things freshly, trying to find a new way of describing things, and trying not to rely upon the way other people have resolved things.
Why have you just done that?
Because no, I can't paint in public. When you talk about painting, you give clues, but you don't give answers. You know, painting should be mysterious. And if one spends too much time talking about it, then you begin to get rid of the mystery. And that's a problem for people that paint and teach. If you're not careful, if you don't keep part of the activity private for yourself, then you lose the whole game. I've always made paintings of the sea at some stage in my career, but only kind of souvenir paintings. So when I planned this exhibition, I felt it would be great to try to make a painting, or a set of paintings of the sea, which were as significant as any other paintings that I'd made. I would deliberately try to paint something which called upon everything that I'd learned about painting and take on something which I wasn't sure I could actually achieve. In the back of my mind were the great paintings of the sea by Turner, and
I asked myself many times, was there any point in trying to paint a picture of the sea when I was aware of that? But that didn't stop me. I just found that as a motivating factor. And I prefer really to compare what I'm doing with what Turner did than to compare it with somebody who was just painting souvenirs of the sea. The way the work is developed is by simply observing and trying to understand what's happening visually and physically, and then trying to invent a way of describing what I can see. I mean, if I wanted to make something which was realistic, then I'd come and just take photographs. But clearly what I'm trying to do is to make something which is the equivalent, I suppose, of somebody writing a symphony of the sea. And I'm trying to make a painting which isn't relying upon obvious preconceptions.
What I feel about those paintings is that they are of the sea, they are about the sea. They're not just saying this is what the sea looks like. They've got this wonderful feeling of water, of space, of misty damp air, of movement, and all the things that the sea is about. And yet the marks themselves aren't saying this is a wave, this is a cliff. And this is what poetry is about. You're putting words together that don't just describe something, but they're the very essence of the subject, and that's what Peter's managed to achieve in these paintings.
On painting the sea, in a way, we'll have to try to invent a different way of painting it, a way which was more spontaneous and freer. When I go back to painting landscapes, if I do, it will have an effect of giving me the confidence to paint in a way which isn't constrained by any kind of formula.
So the exhibition really is about trying to find out, at the end of the day, after the new paintings which are of Turellin and on Swan, whether in fact I've been true to my own vision or my own personality, or was I just simply full of influences? And a friend phoned me up and said, what's the exhibition like? I said, actually, it's rather beautiful. He said, is there something gone wrong with you? And what I meant by that was, whatever is here, I couldn't have done it any other different kind of way.
What is true of all his periods, as it were, is this energy. And through the energy, the society, the community, the external landscape comes to life in the way he's made it all.
Peter loves painting, he loves the landscape. He's looked at so many different landscape painters. Of course they influence him, but everything in this exhibition is Peter's, and that's unquestionable.
Thank you very much. We'll start here.
Your next on shows over on BBC One Wales next Wednesday. Details on the way.
Wales's answer to Morecambe and Wise.
You could write 10 stories about the life of Brian and Ronnie. This is my take on it.
From Mike Povey's controversial play to the good old days.
He just went for a bad period and left the rest out.
Has time tainted our view of them?
Ronnie ended up being defined by somebody who had died a good 20 years before.
The Life of Ryan and Ronnie, on show, Wednesday night at 10:40 on BBC One Wales.
Today it lies at the bottom of Tryweryn Reservoir. 40 years ago it was a vibrant Welsh community. Using some remarkable newly discovered archive now, 2W remembers Capel Celyn and tells the tale of the drowning of a village.
There are ghosts under this Welsh lake, ghosts that have haunted Wales for half a century. These are the ghosts of the village of Capel Celyn. Beneath these troubled, cold waters lie the bodies of generations which shaped this valley. And before their 48 descendants were forced to leave, they even had to dig up their dead.
Some of the corpses were taken to the new memorial chapel, but the graveyard was sealed up with concrete.
I used to pass them at night walking home. It was very, very scary. See all these coffins on the walls and on the roadside. It's very, very depressing. And the smell of it was awful.
The graveyard that Capel Celyn became has been for 50 years a rallying cry for nationalist and language campaigners. It became a political cause that still creates anger and controversy. The cause was taken up by political leaders